I don't know if this is a conspiracy between Christy and Rebecca Rose. I suspect it is, but this section, I was dutifully informed, was called Turning the Spotlight, and apparently I am the lab rat, and I am the subject under the spotlight today, which suits me just fine, because I'm never happier than when I'm just answering questions. I'm better, I hope, at answering them than I am at asking them. But in any event, I want to welcome Rebecca Rose. Great to see you again.
I'm happy to be here, Sacha. Thank you so much. Yeah. No, there's no lab rats here. Yeah. But it is unusual. Thanks for having me on Lazarus Initiative. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, I'm very, very happy to see you again. And I don't know if we're going to be looking in at the audience comments, Christy. That's a matter for you, but it might be of some interest there. In any event, Rebecca Rose, I am your subject, and you have the floor.
Great. Thank you so much. So the last time we spoke, I feel, over the summer, we talked about way back in 1996, your experiences with a rather large reptilian being and the transformative, and even shocking presence of the I am, and the transformative qualities that produced a really different path for you. I mean, over time and distillation of the experience, so many years that it took to maybe realize that in your life. I'm paraphrasing, but after 96, I feel like we were starting to get into something that happened in 97, August 1st, 1997. I know this is taking us back pretty far, but there was something else that happened on the heels of the experience with the Draco Reptilian. And I was curious of that with the moon. And to lead you into that, I just wondered if you would just share a little bit about what was happening in your world at that time. I know that music was seemed to be moving into something else there, and things were dissolving. There was a threshold for you.
Thank you for this. I really appreciate the question, but it's an incredibly difficult one for me to answer because to be frank with you, I'm kind of covenanted to myself not to speak about this 1997 chapter in my life. But I'm very, very grateful that you were so sensitive as to pick up on that piece that I'd mentioned, because indeed I think it was 96 when I did have that extraordinary interface with what I many years later, certainly in light of the tremendous researchers that David Icke popularized, connected to Draco-reptilianism or the Chitauri, as the Sangomas or the Zulus would have of Africa. And of course, all cultural narratives include stories of reptiles and feathered serpents and dragons and this, that, and the other. But to be sure, categorically, in 96, I did see one of these creatures emerge in my living room in broad daylight in the middle of the afternoon on a delightful sunny day, whilst I was being interviewed by a journalist who later I worked out pretty much on the day that she'd come in purposefully to act as a catalyst for this diabolical event. And in 1996, I had no conceptual framework to be able to understand what happened, other than the fact that she'd gone catatonic partway through the interview. And as she'd gone catatonic, I sensed this presence, was concerned about her because I thought she was having some kind of a conniption or fit, was about to reach out to shake her, like, are you okay? And then sensed a presence, turned, and then saw this godless creature, like I guess a Tyrannosaurus Rex, leaning in and to all intents and purposes about to eviscerate me, and then hurl myself at a concrete wall to get away from it, which knocked sense into me. And then time dilated in that moment. As you recall, I was speaking about the dilation of time when you're faced with that kind of unbearable, not only existential crisis and compounded fight and flight that hits the chemistry of the body. But another phenomenon occurs, which is a kind of fail-safe built or hardwired into the human survival mechanism, and that is the dilation of time, where everything slows down just sufficiently for you to be able to move and get out of the way of whatever it is. So that's a well understood phenomenon that occurs. I suspect it's to people who are more conscious than not that dilation of time happens, much like a Neo in the Matrix, jumping and getting out the way of the flying bullets and all of that stuff. But I know that dilation of time at that moment, in my experience with this Draco reptilian, was time enough for me to gather my deepest senses or sensibilities in that existential crisis, that moment of not just fight or flight, but do or die. And what happened was I summoned my deepest strength. I believe that was a connection to Atman, the divine will, connected to my purpose in this world at that instant. And I was able to become, in that sense, momentarily omniscient in the experience. So not caught up in, oh, fuck, I'm about to be eviscerated by some science fiction that's just come to life in my living room, and there's no one here to witness it and tell my mother I love her because I'm, going to be taken out. I didn't go into any of that. I transpersonalized it, went into a different state of grace or being, and saw that this creature was the sum total. Not only was it my reckoning, but it was the sum total of the entirety of expression in the formation of my soul since soul inception, meaning to say the unresolved aspects of me, of this vessel, of this soul signature. So the entirety of the unresolved aspects of the formation of my soul came from ancient futures into this living moment in the perfect geometry of the living moment in order to catalyze a profound awakening within me, which was precisely that transpersonalized lens of seeing the greater
Yes.
mystery and magic of life. And having then had that experience, reckoning with this creature and not sending love to it in the kind of hippified sense, but certainly looking into its third eye, this kind of, and transmitting to it, I am that thou art, because that was all that was happening inside of me. I was recognizing that creature was the unresolved aspects of me. It was here to teach me and to bring the entirety of the unresolved shade or contrast in my soul into the living moment, which I had the choice to absolve in one living moment. And that's what I did by best accounts, because I survived the experience. And then threw the bitch out of my room, this female journalist who'd come to interview me, and was very adrenalized after the fact, but took me many, many months to recover, obviously, from that. I couldn't talk about it, couldn't speak about it, because I was already concerned that people thought I was mad. But the point is that was now the more distance in time from the experience, the more of an unbearable grace point I recognized that was in my life. It was an unutterable, ineffable grace point. And I see, and that's also how I learned one of the tenets of the blah blah that I give out is that the devil always serves God's design. And that much was something I learned in that moment. Now, that, having said that, surviving that piece, it led to the next year, 2027. Forgive me, 1997.
1990, yes, yeah.
And something did occur to my life in August of 1997. Thank you for being so gracious as to remember that date. It was the 1st of August, 1997. And that event was indeed a diabolical event. And it was a murderous event of my skirting with evil being the singular absence of love, and the totality of the principle of fear in a living moment. And that I was met with that reckoning on the 1st of August 1997. It was catalyzed by an event an individual and an event. And again, I don't want to speak to that, if you don't mind. But that event, that relational event moment of it occurring, brought about catastrophic failure of my soul signature. So it's almost as though, looking back on this, I'm talking about, that the Draco reptilian was an emissary or an agent of the dark come to cause an unholy disruption in my life and in my journey. It failed to do so because I managed somehow to alchemize that experience on that day, at that moment. But a year later, another emissary came in, bringing something in that I couldn't even see coming. It wasn't a big, scary, smelly Draco reptilian, 11, 12 foot high, crouched in my living room. This was now something that came like the scent of a rose. It came as something beautiful and magical and landed like a butterfly. And then I opened up to it because it was the most beautiful thing that I'd ever received in a relational dynamic. And boom. And then the act occurred, and it was a murderous act. It was something which annihilated me momentarily and caused a death event in me. The moment that it happened, I remember clutching an amethyst that I had on the fireplace, on the mantelpiece in my living room. And I remember falling backwards, grabbing that amethyst. It was the only thing I could think to do, falling back into my bedroom and falling onto the bed, and with the amethyst placed it onto my, just above my solar plexus here, because something was happening here at that moment. And as I fell onto the bed, a beam of blue light shot out of my, it was above my solar plexus, just above my solar plexus, but a beam of blue light, I guess about yay diameter, came out and shot up through the ceiling. Later, after the fact, the amethyst stone was bleached white. I still have it in storage.
Wow. Yeah.
It was literally after that incident, stone was bleached absolutely white. But that blue light that came out of my solar plexus heart center was in some extraordinary invitation into a conscious death. I was invited to collapse into what was taking place with in a sense, a command structure around me was informing me that I had only one of two choices that I could make. Either way, I was going to die, and I was going to experience the death, the mechanics of the death. I could choose only one differential, which was I could choose to keep my eyes wide open. I'm talking about physical and then psychic eyes during the experience, or I could close my physical eyes and my psychic eyes and, in a sense, try to filter the experience to some extent. And that was on offer to me as I felt myself collapsing into the vortex of this light. And what I did do was determine that after what I'd been through the year before with this draconian reptilian entity and the sheer weirdness that was going on in my life at that time, I determined that I would keep my eyes wide open and I would enter this death gate, eyes wide open. And I did. And it's the only thing I give myself credit for in life. And I mean, the only thing I ever credit myself for is having the courage on that day, momentous courage, to be able to enter into that death experience with my eyes wide open, because I'm naturally skittish and chicken shit and a fearful person. If there's a loud bang, I'm the first person to fall to the ground, duck under the sofa. I'm also the first person to defend and fight and jump into a fire. So I've got that built into me. I protect others, and I will always be the first to jump into the fight and to protect and serve in that way. But my instinct is because of the growing up in a war and loud bangs and things like that, my first instinct is to duck when I hear a loud bang. So I'm naturally skittish and would choose the easy option. But in this case, I chose the hard one, which is to keep my eyes wide open. And I'll tell you, I went into that death. It took me 2 years to recover. By 1999, I recovered. After the experience in 97, I was graciously taken in by a noble woman in Morocco, a beautiful soul, and her family connected to the royal household in Morocco. And I lived largely grace and favor in Morocco, mostly in Marrakesh on and off, between 1998 1998, 1999, and then in Morocco, sitting in the beautiful 1,000-year-old palace in Marrakesh one sunny afternoon, against one of these beautiful columns, mosaic, 1,000-year-old mosaics, and these huge columns. And I remember sitting in the courtyard with these orange trees and little servant women bustling around with all their white fabric wrapped around them. And I remember the prince, my beloved Prince Moulay Ali Alaouai, sitting smoking hashish on the other side of the courtyard on the phone to someone. And I remember sitting with my back against this vast mosaic 1,000-year-old column in the palace, and feeling this beautiful Moroccan heat. And I remember looking up, and for the first time in my life, and I dare say the last, I said what we all say at some point in our journey, which was, give me a fucking sign. Like,
Yes.
give me a fucking sign. Because I'd spent 2 years stewing and resurrecting from the death that I'd been through, but I still didn't know what my purpose, my mission was in life. I was still living through the echo of my rock and roll, and having bolted out of that and left a number of beautiful souls and talented people very high and dry, for which I feel guilt to this day. But I remember asking, give me a sign. I need a sign now. It's been 2 years sitting in the Moroccan sun mostly. I need a fucking sign. And do you know what happened? A piece of the mosaic fell down off this ancient column and landed at my feet where I was seated, with my bare feet. And I reached and picked up the piece of the mosaic, and it was a geometric shape, a geometric form. And it was fascinating. And I held it, and I took it with me. I thought, I'm going to steal this piece of history from the palace. And I did. I hustled it out. It would have been given to me, but I kept it. And then I studied the piece of geometry after the fact. And it turned out that piece of geometry was an interlocking Metatronic symbol. And it meant the breath of Allah, the compassionate. That symbol then defined my entire journey. The interlocking of these geometric forms, as I understood and then learned about the geometry, became the source code of pure truth, right action, and the entirety of my journey, which is still very much kind of in its formative stages. Even now, in my middle age, I'm entering still into inquiry. But that symbol became a symbol that unfolded and led me to Bali. Actually, it's why I ended up in Bali. That symbol.
I think I heard you say that. Yes, previously. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll leave it at that. But just to say that that 1997 event was diabolical, far, far worse than the encounter with the draconian reptilian creature. But it was also, again, the devil serving God's design, and the beneficence that I received out of that was the source code to my life's mission.
Yeah. Well, and you said previously that, the oversoul, the soul orchestrates its own, ascension. So this is all part of that. And what strikes me as you were relaying there about 97 and that eventful day was that you remembered it, that you had recollection is remarkable, Sasha. But I see lots of people in my client practice who have had life-altering touches with the other worlds, as I call them, but they don't remember. So even though it sounds, as it comes through me empathically as you're speaking, and I'm feeling into this whole thing for you so long ago, and yet so present, you have this fullness, even though it was so. You came away with some gold, and I think you've already stated that, but I'm just reflecting. That's one of the most powerful things I got out of what you just spoke so elegantly and eloquently. Yeah. And I could see, years later, not, these things are so difficult to talk about. With my own experience, I am still reckoning with what happened to me, decades ago, with the ritual abuse and these things that went on in my early life, with family, extended family. So and I too view these things as almost like the gateway through which I come in your language, the angelic human, the divine human. I come into my potency as a soul actualized on this planet right now. So this has informed your trajectory in ways that it sounds like you're still reckoning with. You know, how have these brushes with the deeply unconventional and the remarkably almost supernatural informed your belief system? I mean, were you aware of these kinds of phenomena before they actually happened to you firsthand?
So I can tell you that yes, without any question of doubt, the answer to that question is yes. Because in the 1980s, as a teenager, I had the most defining experience of my life, and I can't remember the year exactly. I'd have to go back and really forensically reanalyze my history to get the date line. It was late 1980s, and I was in Cologne, Germany. I'd been dispatched out of Africa after the war. I'd been dispatched to England, and I'd spent a few months in England before following a girl who I was in love with, who was a German girl. She was in England with me, and then she'd gone back to Germany, and I forged a passport in order to follow her to Germany. In those days, it was easily enough done. And because I was stateless, I had no passport. I was living grace and favor of Her Majesty in the United Kingdom as a refugee. But I had to follow this girl who I was in love with, and the only way I could do it was use my graphic design skills, and I forged a passport. And in those days, the computers and digitization weren't anywhere to be seen, so it was relatively easy to do. And I did get through, managed to use that temporary passport to get into Germany. And that ended up badly because she ditched me anyway. But I ended up finding myself, and this is where it becomes a bit of a sob story. And if I ever did write this kind of book, this would be a pretty moving or stirring chapter. But I did find myself in Munich in minus 30 odd degrees. It was one of the coldest winters on record. It was snowing. I'd all but been thrown out by the girl who didn't really want to convene a relationship with me beyond a point, given that I was a penniless, broke, long-haired poet, literally just wanting my mother's tit in my mouth. That's all I was trying to do, transferring from my mum's tit to the next girlfriend. That's what most men do until their balls have dropped. And certainly I was caught up in that kind of very stilted young man energy when you're a teenage man trying to grow harder and faster than you're able to. But there I was in boots that had a hole in the right foot, trudging through the snow with less than 10 pounds sterling in my pocket, and in Munich. And I had no idea what to do. And I knew I had only the forged passport and not even the means to get back to England. And it was a ghastly night, and it was very late, must have been close to 11 p.m. And I was walking through a place called Schwabing in Munich, and there was a pub open, and I went in to get myself warm, not to spend my last money on anything to eat or drink, but I went in to get warm, and was grateful at that. And I noticed that there was a man playing pinball in the corner with a long camel trench coat on, and he had long, beautiful dreadlocks, and he was playing this incredible animated pinball. And I went up behind him just to watch how he was doing it with such dexterity. He stopped instantly. He turned around and he looked at me squarely. He had the most beautiful black dreadlocks and this long camel trench coat and this ancient, beautiful face. And he said my name. And he said, "Are you ready for work? Are you ready to work?" And he said it in a stern way. And my heart completely fell out of my body because, A, how the fuck does he know my name? And what does he mean? Am I ready? Yes, I've never been more ready in my entire life. And this beautiful soul whose name was Otis Lee, ended up taking me under his wing that night. He was a mystic. He was an extraordinary adept. He could do remarkable things, miraculous things. I saw him on, I think, two occasions levitating when he went into his practice. He was strict with me. He was very physical with me. He would wrestle me and fight with me. I was with him for the best part of a year, being trained by him in the work, as he called it. He took me around. We traveled to various countries by road, and he taught me so much in that period of time. He taught me about the Hermetic sciences, Hermes Trismegistus. I was steeped in the knowledge of the Hermetic sciences by him, all the way through to Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical premise as well, and beyond. And on one at the end of my learning curve with him, I went through a ghastly experience where I became demonically possessed for a couple of weeks, a few weeks. I think, I can't remember exactly. I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. And when I say demonically possessed, what I mean was I got taken over by some force. He had to take me back to his home in The Hague in Holland, where he was a black man from Paramaribo in Suriname. And he took me to his mother, and she was an old, beautiful woman who took me into the house. They had no electricity. It was just kerosene lamps and lights in that house, and cooking on a Bunsen stove. And I ended up being looked after by his mother and his immediate family, whilst he went off to consult a group of wizards that he trained with to try to get me depossessed or whatever. So in the period that he was gone for a couple of weeks, it was arguably the worst experience of my life in terms of protracted period of time, because over those couple of weeks, the only way I can describe it was I was being picked up and bodily spun backwards constantly. Just constantly spinning, and never being allowed to rest from that spinning motion. So I could stand up and walk and be fed and move from one room to another room with help, but it felt like I was spinning backwards, and I was just completely had no command over my being. So psychically, emotionally, physically, spiritually, I was under endemic assault by demonic forces that, by best accounts, were trying to get in, but I was preventing that atom seed from being surrendered to them. So that meant that I was caught up in the dialectic. I was caught up in the battleground. And the battle continued for a couple of weeks. He came back eventually and performed an exorcism of sorts. There's a lot more to the story, which is fascinating, to do with disembodied spirits, which I was seeing and communicating with. In particular, one beautiful 22-year-old dead girl who apparently, we found out after the fact, had died in the apartment above where we were 2 years earlier. But I was seeing her and conducting a full relationship with this dead girl. Beautiful, beautiful girl. And when he came back and did this cleansing, that was the only way that I could get out of this apartment, because prior to that, I couldn't leave the apartment. It felt like I was firewalled. If I tried to get out of the apartment, I wasn't able to physically cross the threshold without blacking out and choking. So I had to stay in this apartment surrounded by those spirits, especially the spirit of that dead young girl. And I understand now why that was happening. But the bottom line is, when he came back to do the dispossession, whatever you call it, after that ceremony that he conducted that evening, I was able to breathe. The marks and the scars and the welts all over my body disappeared. The claw marks, all of that shit, that fairly normal shit that happens in situations like that, all disappeared. And he took me that night out of Holland, took me straight to Germany by road. And I remember in the morning we arrived in Cologne in Germany, and he was exhausted because he'd been driving me out. He had been told he had to physically get me away from Holland, from that location where I'd been possessed or stricken. He also explained to me, incidentally, that the bolt had come at him from people who'd wanted him dead in Southern America, but the bolt had missed him and hit me. To harm me. It was not intended to harm me particularly, but because it couldn't hit him, the energetic force, it hit me, and that was what triggered the possession, apparently. So nonetheless, we're in Cologne now, in Germany. He's exhausted and tells me he's got to go and do his practice, and he puts me into a room. We're in a safe house, a house connected to the movement that he was involved with in his beautiful practice. And I was sent to lay down in a room whilst he went for a 2-hour, 3-hour practice. And I remember lying in that room, exasperated, because I'd just come out of this 3 or 4 weeks of possession and this ghastly experience, and I was trying to understand what had happened, and I was trying to understand how all these marks and growths and things had disappeared off my body instantly. Like, what kind of magic happened? I was deeply grateful that I was no longer spinning and had this awful psychic assault going on. And the next thing that happened in this bedroom, in this house in Cologne, is this host of angelic beings appeared and pulled me out of my body and allowed me to play with them. They imbued me with song and with music. I became a composer after that experience. I hated music up to that point.
Okay.
I asked my mother, my sister, I never listened to music as a child. I couldn't bear it. They were music fundies. I couldn't sing. I couldn't anything. After this experience, which lasted less than an hour, maybe 2 hours, engaged with these angelic beings, I could compose. I could more or less read and write music as well, not in the classical sense, but I had a complete understanding, symbiotic connection with it. And I became a singer, a musician, performer. That was my life the next 10 years. My music was all inspired through that instant activation through these angelic beings. But the most important thing, and I'm going to end it here, is that these angelic beings, and I remember that experience as if it happened earlier today. It'll never, ever leave me. It's utterly burnt like a holy stigmata into me. And what these voices were filling me with in music was they were imprinting me with a knowledge about ascension, about the mechanics of ascension. And the way that they were allowing me to experiment with the understanding of ascension was they were allowing me to move my star body, because I was with them. My physical body was there lying on the bed. My star body was engaging with these angelic beings. And it was beautiful. It was my same body and face and everything, but it was made up of billions and billions of pinpricks of light. And it was so beautiful being in this state. And it was all sound and frequency, engaging with these beautiful beings. And they were laughing. They were so loving and benevolent and kind. And they were saying, look, we're giving this is your theater, play, enjoy it, and go work out the distinction between the star body and the physical body. So I was able to literally morph in from the physical to the star and feel the inverse and the obverse elements of those mechanics of ascension and descension. And then at a given point, they said, okay, khalas, it's over, back into your body completely now. We're leaving. And I was like, no, you not leave me. And it was worse than being separated from my mother for a year at the age of 7 or 8, when I was torn off her tit for a year and didn't see her. It was worse than that. And they were leaving, and they allowed me to fall back into my physical body. So I had to take my star body back. And the last thing they allowed me to do was to witness my star hand fall into my physical hand right in front of my eyes. But they allowed my physical eyes to open and witness the star body and play with the mechanics of ascension, even with my physical eyes. Now, that to me was the key piece. That was where I understood without any question of doubt that ascension was to be a biological process for humanity. It was a biological phenomenon that is going to be occurring. It's not a psycho-spiritual one or something that's going to happen out there and pull us out. It's a full-bodied material 3D ascension, and we're going to feel it physically morphing into that star, the star body, so to speak. In any event, I'm going to leave the story at that. But that for me was the most defining experience of my life, and that's also what gave me, I think, the imprint of grace to deal many years later with the or 10 years later thereabouts, with the draconian reptilian event, and then with that ghastly death event that I described to you. And I think that's
Wow.
what came
Yeah.
through.
Yeah, so this was all, I hear you now chronologically. This was preceding to the reptilian and, 96, 97. This was prior to, 10 years prior. So,
Yes.
wow. And remarkably, again, when you shared this, it was so vivid and I could really feel all that moving through me. And I thought, oh God, again, you've remembered it and conveyed it so adeptly. It's like bringing back a treasure from those other worlds is what you've done. Those who walk between worlds journey to that other place and bring back the news, so to say, and the wisdom and the love, the frequency of all that's in us that we have forgotten.
Yes.
You conveyed that beautifully. Yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
that's why I'm sober. It's why I never touched anything my entire life. I've never touched alcohol. I've never touched marijuana or mushrooms. And I love marijuana and mushrooms. I love it around me, and I love the smell. I love people enjoying these experiences, and I have a lot of experience of witnessing and living and working amongst people on heroin and on cocaine and on everything you could imagine. So it's not that I'm green to the culture and the tonality and the frequency of these things for good or for ill. I'm very familiar with them. But I just never participated myself one iota. And so that abject and stark sobriety, I think, has also, to some great extent, helped me maintain a very even keel, and yet still have the most extraordinarily transcendent and out of this world experiences. So they've not precluded me from having remarkable experiences, being sober.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and as you were relaying those weeks of possession, let's say, did you die? Did you
Technically,
die?
with the death event that occurred in my life in 1st of August in 1997, it lasted technically about 2 weeks. I was largely gaga, being looked after by a couple of very
Yeah.
dear friends who were more or less spoon feeding me at the time. And but I can tell you that I did travel to the moon. That's the only way I can put it. I remember explaining this to David Icke in my living room in about um, I can't remember, must have about 15 odd years ago. I remember telling David Icke this story, that when this death event happened to me, I was transported to the moon. My psyche literally found itself on the far side of the moon. And I reckoned at that time that the moon was a foreign object, that it was a hostile object, a foreign object, but a very necessary one, and one that had come in to augur great teaching in the realm of duality for humanity and for all of this universe, in point of fact. And I spent what in linear terms was about 2 weeks um, in the moon, learning a language is the only way I can put it. And it's the language of the dark side of the moon. And again, that's the only way I can put it, because it
Yeah.
was an ineffable language, and it was something that was, I guess, a hybrid of tone and geometry. And that language is quite possibly some off-world ET language, and maybe I'll completely be able to reconstitute that language in days ahead. But I can tell you that after 2 weeks being disembodied and off-world, I did glean what I needed to glean, and then I started to make a movement back to Earth. And my entire psyche, as though it was my physical, causal, astral, spiritual eyes, were all part of that journey back to Earth. And I knew I was heading back to Earth, back to my uh, allocated home planet for now. And as I was moving back toward Earth, the planet Mercury came, and I could see it coming from the right, and it stopped and blocked my passage to Earth, which was very curious. and I was unable to move. I was unable to move until I decoded something, which I did decode, and then Mercury moved out the way. And then I was able to continue toward Earth, and I could see my beautiful planet, home planet Earth, coming. And as I was moving closer toward it, I started to observe a horrendous, the most awful apocalyptic scenario. I could see the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere were becoming separated. It was almost as though there was a wound around the hemisphere of the Earth that was fizzing and cracking and popping and bubbling, almost like a bloodied, fizzing wound. And as I came closer to Earth, I could see the two hemispheres were being separated interminably through this bizarre kind of cosmic chemistry. And then as I came closer, I saw that the northern hemisphere was a sleeping king, a vast, epochal, kind of King Wenceslas type, fatted, satiated, gluttonous king, sleeping and mumbling and muttering. And he took up the entirety of the northern hemisphere. And he was quite disgusting. And he was completely preoccupied with whatever was going on in his own mind. But he was kind of chomping and asleep. And I saw the southern hemisphere was awakening, and she was beautiful. And she was feminine. She was the emergent goddess. And she was beautiful. And she was dark. And she was fucking terrifying. And she was inexpressibly beautiful and powerful, and she was awakening, and I could see her awakening. And then I heard her say, "Hear me, my lord," or "Hear me, my king, my husband, forgive me, hear me, my husband." And I was hurtling still closer towards the earth, and he kept on muttering as though he was sleeping and snoring and turning over. And I was like, dude, wake up, trust me. And then she said it a second time. She said, "Hear me, my husband." And he was still asleep. And I was starting to scream and say, "Wake up, man, wake up. She is speaking. Listen to her. She is speaking." And she said it for the third time. She said, hear me, my husband, or I will make myself heard. Those were the exact words. And at that moment, he continued to sleep. And then I saw this unfolding apocalypse. I saw the 9/11. I saw all of these god-awful events occurring on the earth. And it was a very kind of a sort of pastiche of Nostradamus type images, some of which I could understand, others I couldn't. And this was 1997. Okay. This was some years before 9/11. So I descended, came back into my body, boom, and I was embodied. And what I did was then went to Morocco. I was rescued by this noble woman in Morocco. It's a beautiful story. And her family, she was a seer, an oracle. She'd come to England to look for me. She'd seen a video of mine on MTV. And she had got on a plane and gone to London to find me. She was some kind of oracle, and she found me. My music manager called me and dragged me to see her in a hotel. And when we were alone, she was like, "Habibi, Habibi." And I said, "Madam, it already happened." And I said I was already killed. And she was, "Allah, wallah, wallah," because she'd seen that something diabolical was going to happen to me. And she'd said, "Sacha, the creature that killed you was an entity that's come to this world in order to kill select men at this age, and you were the target. You were a prime target." And I said, "Well, I've survived. Here I am." And she took me. She said, "You're coming with me," and she took me to Morocco. And I ended up for 2 years largely being looked after there. Now, and then resurrecting from there. But the point being that it took me 2 years to resurrect from that experience of the death and the lunar thing and the coming back to earth and the prophecy shit that was embedded into me. 2 years to assimilate the language into coherence, some measure of coherence. And then I went back to England, to Cronus, the Crown. I registered Humanitad Foundation, my foundation, and I knew my work then had to bridge the South and the North, the hemispheres. But so I knew that my work had to now go full tilt into merging the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, but I didn't know how, what, when, where, or why. So I started to study Islam, because I also had seen in that prophetic kind of pastiche, I had seen that the Islamic world was going to be under savage attack by the Saturnian Judeo-Christic world. That's not to say that the Judeo-Christic world is satanic. It's just to say that the deeply embedded aspect of Satan is absolutely embedded within the Judeo-Christic echelon. There is an echelon that is nested within the beautiful Jewish faith and the beautiful Christian faith, and it's taken root there for hundreds of years. That is actually the 500-year hegemony of the crowns of Europe, becoming governments, becoming the dragnet of enslavement of humanity, the doctrine of discovery, the Vatican conspiracy, the fucking IMF and the BIS and the World Bank, and the whole godless system of registering human souls and licensing bicycles and homes. All of that tabulation, fictionalizing, securitizing of the living sons and daughters of God is the great crime of ages. So I could see that in that prophetic vision. So I knew that I had to come in and create some kind of bridge between North and South, between Judeo-Christian mindset and the Islamic mindset. And so I set about studying Islam and became very adept as a scholar of Hanafi, Hanbali, Shafi, and Maliki, the schools of Islam. And then I used that as my the turnkey for my diplomacy that I started doing for many years. And then Humanità did its work, and that led to ultimately the New Earth Project. Once I learned that what I needed to learn through diplomacy and through international relations and all that crap, I then understood I had to build the model, and that New Earth had to become the living template. And so I morphed away from foundation work, diplomacy, and deep research into disclosure and into refining the template for humanity, which is what the New Earth Project, New Earth Initiative was. And that's led to the New Earth Nation, and that's led to what we're about to unveil in 2026. And believe me, we've been through hell in the last few short years, our organization and the beautiful constellation of souls within it. But it is an alchemy. It's a work in progress. Most of the people who work with me haven't the faintest fucking idea about what this is. Some are just kind of, fulfilling function. Others have more of a spiritual attunement to the greater work. I am master and commander of what it is that I'm doing, and I have a very, very clear mission. And that's where you meet me today in the Lazarus Initiative, which is part of that process of resurrecting ourselves and creating that narrative that can bring many souls from around the world into this convention of the new fellowship. And this is not a new religion I'm talking about. I'm not talking about something cultish, which is why I drop F-bombs all the time, because I do not want to be mistaken for being some kind of a spiritualized icon. I couldn't be further from that, but I'm very crystal clear about being the Adam and about being the living son of God, as all my fellows men are, and daughters of God. So that's where you meet me today in the Lazarus Symposium.
Thank you. I mean, your clarity of recall, as I've said, is crystalline, and so is the mission with this. And without which, without these experiences, not able to, maybe you had to have this initiation. And maybe that's the message to others today, is like, as I hear you, it's like, oh, when we have these rogue moments, so to say, they're not rogue. And rogue is a diplomatic word. That's moderate. But when we are brought beyond the veil and we don't know what the fuck just happened to us. I mean, I had a week ago today, I had an experience in which I was taken over by small parts who had experienced extreme abuse, and I did not have control of my body, and I was terrified. I wish I had it on film, because it's such a record of what we go through. That is, I use that word supernatural in a way. It's quantum in nature. It brings us closer to death, but also closer to God. I can only say that about it. But I had at some point, maybe half an hour ago, I was kind of having, tearing up a little bit with the passion of these experiences, that so often we have such cognitive dissonance and such conditioning and programming to never speak about them, that we might go crazy, not from the experience, but we can't speak to it in language, and
Yeah.
so it's such a great service in just sharing that with such vivid recall, and the message and hope that it gives us about the anomalies that occur. Don't file them away, sit with them, be with them. And if you're if you experience a death, then all the better, because you will transform. Yeah.
Indeed.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
And I'll say this, that to what you've just been saying, I've in my touring, certainly in the last 2 years, um, the opening gambit of my 3-hour lecture is an acknowledgement to whoever's in the audience, and it's not false modesty, but what I am saying every time to every audience is the importance of who they are. Every individual in the room I happen to know is a magnus opus, is a story of inexpressible majesty, that every single one of us, even and possibly especially the more mundane amongst us, are still containers of the most extraordinary stories imaginable. But the degree to which most people are prepared or not prepared to speak their story, to speak their deepest truth, that becomes a travesty, that becomes a great sadness. But I honor every single human being that I meet in the truest tradition of Om Swastiastu, of Om Shanti Shanti, of I am that thou art. I do always acknowledge strangers, every stranger in the journey of my life. I've done it a dozen times today, meeting some of the servants in this beautiful bush lodge, and um, just acknowledging that behind the eyes of every one of these souls in this world is an incredible story. And it's just my hope that people not can all tell their stories. God forbid. I've not really told my story until now. I start to speak to it only because I think that I have a duty of care to, because I've spoken so much on so many subjects for so long now, that I think to help some people contextualize the shit that comes out of my mouth, I do feel honor bound and obligated to answer very truthfully to very, very difficult questions. I mean, all of these questions that you've asked me are difficult ones that would, normally speaking, one would avoid, and step away from. And I think all too many people are withholding and stepping back from speaking their highest truth and the majesty of their story. So at some point, each of us are feeding, I guess, into the greater group narrative. And what is that saying, that every single soul, none of us get to heaven if one of us don't get to heaven? I actually foundationally believe that to be true.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And you've said it in a different way, as I've said it to myself in this past week, since I had this like very I don't have English language words for it, but that I am transmuting something here for the collective, and I had to go into that underworld, otherworld, to bring something back. I'm clearing something, as you were with this, for lack of better words, that possession, so to say, the dark forces coming in. It's like we're transmuting something for more than just Sacha, for more than just Rebecca. Something much greater is going on, and I think that's what's tipped me off in this whole journey of mine. And to understand why do I need to have to go, why do I go through this, and what am I bringing back? There's something here, and it's not just for me. So
Yes.
you speak very well to that, and I hope everyone listening can gather something, the gemstones and pebbles on the beach from their own
Yeah.
journey, and
Yeah.
the stones in their pockets, and there's something beautiful there. That's what I hear you saying.
Well, indeed, but there's a huge distinction between the story that we want to tell ourselves about ourselves, the story we want to tell the world about ourselves. Now, that's the false light narrative that most people are fucked up by and are caught up in, and that's the mask and the performative me, the ego me, the look at me, I'm fucking amazing, look what I can do, I can tap dance, mummy, please give me the applause, give me limelight, give me money, give me fame, give me sex, give me stuff. That parasite, false light gleaning aspect, the egoic form in the human, is a uniquely ugly and unattractive aspect. And that's the one I don't like. I don't like makeup. I don't like baubles anymore. I don't like performative shit. I don't like masks. I don't like look at me. Look at me. That's so unattractive. Like beautiful, naked, vulnerable, raw, integrated, authentic humanity is the most majestic, powerful, ineffable force in the universe. That creature I am so in love with, and in a place like Malawi, where I am right now, and in Africa, with the stink of the place in so many parts, the wretched poverty and destitution, notwithstanding, the glowing heart of these people in that fragile modesty is something that just brings it really brings tears to my eyes. I mean, being on this ship 2 days ago, sailing to the Likoma Island in Lake Malawi, which is like almost 600 fucking kilometers long. So it's a day and a half sailing on a rust bucket with almost 800 souls on it. That should have only been taking about 300. A ship that's almost 100 years old and shouldn't have been shipped. It should have been taken out of service, 40 years ago. It's a death trap, and we were squeezed onto this boat. Had to get onto it, and I found myself about 48 hours ago being pushed onto the boat from the fishing boats that we were clawing our way up the ship into the ship, being pulled in. It's like a cage in the lower deck, and you have to be pulled in. And there's literally 500-600 people crammed in there in a place that should only take 150 on that deck, or 120. And we couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The stink was unbelievable. And then being pushed through these people, being pulled through. It was literally swimming through people, over them, around them, to get to the stairwell, to be pulled up to the upper deck. And I'm having this extraordinary experience. I was describing it a little bit earlier on to the panel at my introduction to the symposium this evening. But it was such a seminal event for me because I'm very claustrophobic, like most people are. And the idea of being caught in this throng of people, and there were more people onboarding the ship, so it was getting denser and denser. We literally couldn't breathe. I was literally trapped with eyes and faces and bums and tits and everything all around me. Couldn't breathe. I lost sight of my colleagues who were literally 20 centimeters behind me, lost sight of them because it was crushed in the people. And I'm thinking to myself, this is just a snapshot of the dark continent. This is happening in a million different venues right now in Africa, in Central South America, and Southeast Asia, in parts of the world where the disenchanted, the disenfranchised are having to survive in an impossible environment with no money and no food in their belly. And it was just so traumatizing, the experience, but it was so beautiful. It was so terrifying. And I remember stilling myself in this panic and going, this is perfect. This is perfect geometry. I must see this if I'm to come to Africa with the New Earth Initiative and do the work that we're doing at the governmental level, at the level of royalty that we're engaging with. And I must see this. I must feel this heat, this depravity, this stink. And I did. And I slept in a rat-infested, cockroach-infested, urinated cabin that stunk. It was the worst night of my life, without any question of doubt. And in a way, it was the most edifying, because I was so grateful at being forced into having the worst possible experience of Africa, just as we're about to create this extraordinary initiative in the place for the upliftment and upshift of these incredible people after 500 years of satanic takeover by the imperial forces of the West. So I'm going to leave my little rant at that, but just to underscore the fact that everything is perfect, and the good common human being, the raw, authentic, unmasked human being, is the one that describes the meek who are about to inherit the earth.
Sacha, thank you so much, and I really appreciate your vulnerability today and bringing the lens back to Africa and what's happening on the planet and off world as well. We've wrapped up a lot here in our time together. I appreciate you diving deep and also bringing these stories forward in a way that it feels, to me as I listen, kind of destined, because you do, as I said, have such recall, and that benefits everybody listening. So what a pleasure to be here and to really hear all this from you.
God bless you, Rebecca Rose. Thank you. It was lovely seeing you again. Thank you, Christy, as well. And to the audience, I'm going to bid you adieu. I have an early morning rise before we drive to Zambia through the bush. Mwah! Thank you.
Goodbye.